let's go into part two. Here we're going to talk IMF briefly. We're going to talk Africa a bit. We're going to talk World Bank and just a bit of economics. So let me begin with the question on you. Are you a capitalist?
Okay, first of all, I think it's important for people to distinguish between being a capitalist and participating in capitalism.
Sure.
And I definitely think by virtue
You
of the world,
participate
I'm a participant in we are, someone said the other day very beautifully, they said we are living with capitalism.
We are?
Living with capitalism. And I think that's an important distinction because being a capitalist means something different. And I think a lot of people are disillusioned into thinking they're capitalists when they are actually just participants in capitalism.
Yeah, okay. So maybe the way I should have asked this question, and thank you for that clarification, is do you believe in capitalism, right? Because we're in the system.
That's a deep question.
Because now it comes down to ideologies, right? Because generally when you ask someone if they're capitalist, that means do you believe in capitalism, right? That's simply put, right?
First of all, I think it depends how one would like to. Because I think there are people who define capitalism as just innovation and like a way of achieving bigger within the economy, right? There's a particular ways of thinking. Neoliberal capitalism versus state-led capitalism is different. Chinese capitalism, which is a state-led structure, is different from American capitalism. Do you see what I mean? So I think ultimately it's about, for me personally, I would never consider myself a pro-capitalist because I think by design, capitalism is exploitative, right? Like because the ultimate goal is, it's kind of like that GDP thing. You just want more and more and more, but that more comes at a cost. And in capitalism, the cost is labor, the people who produce the labor who are exploited. The cost is women who subsidize capitalism. And the reason I say, and we can, this is my passion project, but really how women subsidize capitalism. So in a way, capitalism is anti-woman because capitalism doesn't see women's work as valuable because it's not wage creating. But for a man to be able to go and work in the workplace, there has to be a woman at home raising baby. For a man to become a man, there has to be a woman at home raising that child to become a man, to be part of the workforce. So in a way, the way that it's designed is that women's work subsidizes the system, and it's very much homo economicus focused. Our value is our ability to produce, which is why it's anti-disabled people because they are unable to produce.
Shit.
Right? Capitalism is ableist, right? Because it says if you're unable to participate in wage labor, you're not valuable. If you are unable to produce, you're not valuable. And so, yeah, so it's very much rooted in homo economicus, and I find it's problematic generally because of that.
So if you're not purely capitalist, and thanks again for that clarification, because there's a difference between American capitalism and recent Chinese capitalism, if you want to call it that. For me, the way I view it is it's almost like there's a spectrum of economic systems, right? Where on the one side there's pure capitalism, which is pure free market policies, which research has proved Guti is not the best system. You always need
Even
some.
America doesn't practice free market.
You need obviously some government intervention. I'm just trying to go back to even my university days where there's a balance that you need to find, and it depends on obviously the country, how much state intervention you need. You have your Nordic countries which have a lot of state intervention, they've done well. You have other countries, lots, but haven't done well.
Yeah.
What's on the other side of capitalism? It's socialism, correct?
Not really. I don't think they're either ors.
But wait, just help me understand this. The difference between capitalism, socialism, and communism. Right? I would assume there's a difference, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's differences in it. Actually, the fundamental difference is, if we could think of it this way, is what is the role of the state? What do you see the role of the state as? Is it redistributed in a certain way? Is it for welfare? And so obviously socialist states are associated with the welfare. So it's all about redistribution towards progressing welfare.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, a lot of people with communism, I don't even want to get to that one, but just to say that I think people confuse them. Sometimes people will say South Africa is a socialist state.
Mm-hmm.
South Africa is not a socialist
Socialist.
state,
Mm-hmm.
right? Just because there's welfare programs, it doesn't mean that it's a socialist state. And so that's where I think and capitalism sees the role of the state as very minimalistic. In fact, it would be ideal if there was no state at all, because the market well, provision, health, education, everything would be provisioned in a way with neoliberal capitalism, which is a particular type of capitalism. Because in state-led capitalism like China, what it's saying is that we're going to create more wealth for the country, but it's going to be led by the state and coordinated by the state. So we still have the same goals as kind of neoliberal state in terms of like what we want our economy to look like. But how we get there, it's how you get there that's different with the state-led versus
And
neoliberal.
then communism.
Guys, how do I even begin to explain communism? I feel like
Is communism an economic system?
I would consider it more political.
Because I remember
Yeah.
when they used to say the communists, like in Russia, whatever,
Yeah.
it was. Because sometimes people confuse it. They call them communist versus the West, which was capitalist, and then they assume they opposites. But I do know they're fundamentally different.
Yeah.
It's not
It's
necessarily
not opposites in that way.
an economic system.
A political nationalist.
It's more a
different.
political system, right?
Yeah, political nationalism sort of ideas. But I also just feel like, and I'm glad that this is the conversation, because I think sometimes people are opposed. It's like communism is this dirty word. And I'm not saying that I support communism. I'm just saying that sometimes there's this desire to be anti things. Like people are anti Marxism, right?
Which is
So Marxism, ooh, this is like, it's not anti-capitalism, but it tries to understand, I guess it is actually, but it's trying to understand the world, to say that in the world we've got capitalists and we've got the proletariat, who are the people who capitalism has to exploit to basically be capitalism, right? And so there are these power dynamics. So feminist economics, again, which is what I practice, comes from this idea that the power dynamics are not just the macro level of how the economy functions, but the power decisions are also in the household, right? So how does a couple decide who goes to work and who stays at home? Is a space of power, and that has effects on the economy, because more men in the economy means there's certain power dynamics that are trickling through the economy into the household. And so in that way, Marxism, I think if I was, this is a very, very, I know somebody who'd critique me very
oh,
much.
and they're probably cringing right now and throwing something at the screen. Yeah,
but it's really a power. I think if I were to simplify Marxism, is to say it's a power analysis of how economies function and why they function the way that they do. And Marx obviously had many theories. In fact, he even had theories about love. He believed in free love. I've got this great book called What Would Marx Do? I really love that book. And he believed in free love and yeah, a particular type of society where it was not exploitative. I think the most important thing is unraveling this issue of exploitation, right? Capital exploits labor, capital exploits people, capital exploits land, and all these things.
okay. Also, another topic for another day. Obviously,
Yeah,
the
we could have a
communism
whole
different. But let me just understand this. Whilst you're speaking about exploitation, right? And this is going on from I remember doing this in ethics on a lesser evil. So let's speak. They call it exploitation of women, right? Exploitation of child labor, for example, right? Where on the one hand, you have people arguing, "Guti, guys, pay women fair wages, etc." Right? However, I don't think, as you kept on saying, the design of capitalism is not designed in a way to say, let's be fair across the board. Whereas, okay, if you tell me as a business, let me pay fair wages, I will leave Bangladesh and go to India. I'll go to because we're a globalized economy, I'll go to the next cheapest place, right? So there's obviously, so there's one school of thoughts that says, guys, fair wages, fair trade, which I am for, right? From a ideological point of view, basic human rights, etc. However, other people that are for capitalism and the exploitation. Obviously, they put it in better English than me. However, they'll say, look, capitalism has a benefit in terms of if it wasn't for capitalism, these people would not be employed. Um, and I can see you
Yeah.
shaking your head on that in terms of
Those are false positives.
so let's just discuss that a bit because I remember in ethics where we were speaking about child labor in Chile to say, okay, Sharp, let's pull out this factory in Chile, right? Yes, we were paying. Look, I know it's a hard pill to swallow right now, but let's just speak facts. Uguti, I was paying you a wage, né? And it was terrible conditions, but at least you're getting a wage versus not getting a wage. So if I pull out of this country, I am going to leave you worse off.
Yeah.
I forgot the whole terminology they call it, but let's just discuss that briefly. What are your views on that? Um,
Yeah. I yeah. It's tricky because I feel that there's this great piece. You speaking about this reminds me of this great piece, and I'm trying to remember the author. It's about this recycling like hill, and it's this idea of this person. That whole idea of people are better off getting something than nothing, right?
okay.
But I think some things that the first thing I want to say is that capitalism strives or thrives off of structural inequalities. That's how capitalism thrives. It thrives on exploiting whoever and whenever it's possible, right? We live in racial capitalism. That's also another reality. Globally, it's a racialized capitalism. And they go hand in hand together. And so, and obviously with patriarchy, that's the perfect trio, really, in this current context, supposedly. And so I think, but we have to remember, Uguti, within the structure of capitalism itself, we've already created a false positive, which is to say, with capitalism, we've said people have to have jobs. So we're starting them off already on this particular assumption that in
So
this
our point of
system,
departure already
is like
a
people must
fallacy in a
have
way.
jobs.
Sure.
So now we give people this false positive that says they would have been worse, like, you know what I mean? Like they have to have a job or they're going to be worse off. And that's why I'm saying it's a structural issue. And if your point of departure is, and that's why I was saying earlier that I don't believe that jobs have to be the thing.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, so I was saying, our point of departure is already this world of work which values human beings for their ability to work and provision and have waged work. So the minute you are unable to do that, in a way, your value in the capitalistic system is not acknowledged,
Sure.
right? And which then justifies why then capitalists say you are better off with the job than without, because we live in a society that is driven by wages, right? You need a wage to survive. You need a wage to have food, to have basics, which is why enter human rights, right? Like, it's almost like people are like, let's build this economy thing. And then years later, they were like, yo, guys, this economy thing is not working. There are many people who are poor. And then they're like, let's correct it. Okay, now we need this. Now we need human rights. Now, 90s.
But do you correct it within the current system of capitalism? So do you introduce human rights in this current capitalistic system? Do you introduce what is it, the triple P, people, planet, and profit? Do you know what I mean?
Yes. I know that one.
Do you introduce that in the, in the current system? And why I ask that is because number one, it's probably, yes, it's the right thing to do, but practically would it work? Because we need to look at who is capitalism benefiting
Yeah.
at the end of the day, right? Which there can be many debates and arguments by it's the West. I won't mention any countries, the West,
Hey.
but
We all know. We all know.
you know, but if it's not gonna benefit them in any way, like, and I'm generalizing here, huge generalization. There are great organizations that are trying to do better in these in the West, in the East, in Europe, but just generally the system is not designed, because I love the word you use, designed in that way to actually.
That's the different. Like, are we going to be reformists? I don't believe in being a reformist. I don't believe in taking a car that's. I used this analogy the other day, and apparently an economist loved it, so I'm going to use it here again. Which is to say, you can have a car that's broken, and you can decide, I'm going to take this broken car, and I'm going to spend thousands and thousands and thousands trying to fix it. By the time I fix this then this will be broken. Right now, you're continuously just fixing
Sunk
this
cost
car.
fallacy, right?
Right? But or you could decide, you know what, I actually need a new car. Like I can afford. You can afford both. Let's start there. You can afford both, and you choose the broken car, and you with an intention to change it, right? And so this is my thing. We continuously and that's why I've been telling people that I'm very cautious of how people speak about COVID. Everyone is like, yo, guys, no turning back. We're not going back to the status quo. We are changing our ways. But when you actually hear what people have to say in addition to that, you realize like they're perpetuating the status quo in very real ways. And I think sometimes, we talk about this a lot. It's like rethinking economics for Africa is a big part of our organization, right? And one of the words that have been re-emerging a lot is reimagining. Like, even as progressive economists, as progressive as we think, as progressive as we think they are, we need to reimagine beyond what we've always thought was true. Like, we need to re-educate ourselves. We need to unlearn, relearn, continuously learn. Like, and I'll give you a practical example, which is to say, in 2003, the basic income grant made sense. It's 2020. I actually think we need to dream bigger. Because sometimes what happens is the things we've been crying about all along, we finally get them and we get a portion of what we were asking for and we feel like, wow, I finally won this. But it's like the argument is beyond. We should be thinking, guys, 500 is not going to make the impact we need now, right? We need something else. And so it's the same with capitalism. I mean, I'm definitely for feminist futures that are degrowth, that are green, right? And that are purple. And purple economy refers to the care economy. So understand the labor that is done mostly by women and the value that it has in society. So I think we just have to reimagine our futures, but it requires a serious and so this is where it's hard, because you can reimagine something for South Africa, which is great. But South Africa functions within a global economy and a global structure and political settlements, which are largely men. So they're not going to be like, yay, feminist futures, whoop, whoop. That's not how it's going to work, right? So it's always that hard thing. It's like it's the difference between ideology and what actually happens. So I feel like feminist economists, at least, or people from different sectors, sociologists, everyone, because this is not just economic problem, it's a multi-sector problem, have been rethinking how the economy should be, right? They've been doing this labor and work. Now the question is, how do we get from there to implementation?
Which is big question mark, obviously, around that.
If I knew the answer.
But what I'm saying is, in all of these things that you want to happen, does it happen in the current economic system? Because you keep on saying, let's reimagine. Do we reimagine?
And reform? No, I'm saying we can't reform. I don't think we should.
So you basically, when you say buying a new car, you basically, let's restart this mofo.
We're going to throw away every single policy we've written in South Africa over the last 26 years. Not throw away, but we're going to put them in a study room now. Ne?
So,
and we're going to write from scratch every single thing. We're going to think about every single thing. We're going to analyze through these lenses. This is our framework. We're going to think about the gender implications. We're going to think about the disability implications. We're going to think about these different things. When each policy, we're going to rewrite each policy and we're going to think about how it relates to the constitution. Right? Like we're going to make sure everything is aligned in a particular manner.
Okay. I want to add to your analogy about the car, because I was enjoying that one. I'm like, you know why they don't want to change it? It's because the person who owns the car is a mechanic. So he enjoys fixing it, and it's in his benefits. Do you know what I mean?
He's like, there's no labor cost.
Yeah, like, type of thing. And let me keep on fixing it. It just keeps me busy, because that's how I find my value.
And it's also like the beloved car. Like they inherited the car from their grand, so they feel like they have to save it. Like it's that's actually what it is. People are so invested in,
what's that? The endowment effect as well, right?
People are so invested in neoliberalism. It always amuses me. People are so invested in it. Yo, guys, like, I can never wrap my hand around this, right? Like, I don't understand how you can be invested in a system where you can visibly see how unequal it is in a country like South Africa.
Mm.
Like, how can you be so invested in a system? Like, even if you're a beneficiary of it, ne? But you have to remember, being a beneficiary of the system doesn't mean you always have a safe haven.
Mm.
Because if shit hits the fan in South Africa, guess what? You're also in South Africa.
Mm.
Do you know what I mean? Like, so I don't understand how you can be so invested in a system that even on a selfish level threatens your own existence. On a selfish level. Like, I'm not even saying people must care about other people, but on a selfish level, that you can't sustain, that you can't sleep at home at night and think, as in, I'm going to live like this forever.
Yeah, no, I hear you. Okay, so speaking on capitalism, let me ask you just a straight up big question. We spoke about this again also off a camera. The system was never designed to benefit us in a way. Obviously, how capitalism won, depending on who you ask, was through wars, because the wars were fought on ideologies. The economic system and political system, I mean, communism, fascism, capitalism when it was being birthed, you know. So we won't talk about how capitalism won, but big question, what's capitalism for Africa?
You know, it's a hard question to answer. And the reason why it's hard is because I'm trying to think of the macro global movements that impact Africa in a very real way, right? Like, so
And
the policy decisions that are pro-capitalism that were imposed on the African continent by the IMF and the World Bank since the 1970s play a big role in how we see Africa today. And I want to say that, in thinking about pre-colonial Africa, right? It's not to say maybe capitalism existed in a very real way, right? So we also have to, like, we can't just idealize, like, and just be like, yo, pre-colonial Africa was socialist. Guys, we don't know, first of all, or it could be capitalist. So I think it's just to say that the neoliberal capitalism that we've seen on the African continent, and the reason why this neoliberal capitalism has been so prevalent is because after a lot of countries in the 1960s, a lot of African countries became free, right? And so what happened then is that a lot of them were state-led policies, right? Like, so the state was the one, kind of like what China did to grow, but like the states were the ones controlling kind of the economy and so forth. And then a lot of the countries were obviously commodity dependent because of colonialization, right?
colonization.
I never know how to say that.
The one English word I know.
Yes. Flex when. So because of that, they were very resource dependent. And when there was a commodity price crisis, a lot of these countries were really in distress. And as we know, the IMF and the World Bank come when there's crisis, and they were presenting this alternative financing plan, and they were going to help these countries, but then it obviously came with this policy. And so a lot of African countries have experienced policy externalization, which means policy is not driven by them, it's driven by the IMF and the World Bank. But what that did is that over time, even the IMF admits this, that the economies themselves did not structurally change, right? To be successful in capitalism, you need an economy that is structurally changing in particular ways, right? That's accumulating more. Get a capitalism about accumulation and so forth. So you need an economy that's changing in particular ways. And a lot of African countries did not change in those particular ways, right? And a lot of them became very indebted to the IMF and the World Bank, or had structurally systems that weren't for their benefit. Okay. So even the IMF has admitted that a lot of African countries did not structurally transform, and capitalism thrives off of structural transformation in a way, right? So these economies were sort of stagnant, still commodity dependent, which is a result of colonization. Oh, I said it right. And but I think just to say that whether capitalism would have works in Africa or not, or is for Africa or not, is really a question about could it have been achieved in other ways, right? Like if we had to take away, in a hypothetical situation, if we took away this very neo-colonial approach, right? Because policy externalization in a way is sort of, by the West particularly, is sort of neo-colonialism. And to say that, could we have had like state-led capitalism? Could we have had other structures of capitalism?
Sure.
Right? That could have worked better. And as a person who doesn't support capitalism generally, I feel like we would always get to a point of deep inequality, which is inevitable. In fact, that's where we are now. It doesn't. I think the main thing to take away is that over the years, what we've come to is deep inequality globally. Even the developed countries, like, do you know what I mean? There's deep inequality and structural injustices in various forms and ways. And capitalism reproduces those.
Okay, so obviously, we keep the overarching theme here is the system is the issue, which we've been talking about. So you're basically saying we could have achieved
something else, maybe growth.
We could have done capitalism, but in a different way, which I think when I was reading Hlumelo Biko, and I'm hoping to have him on the show soon, his book, very great book actually, called Africa Reimagined. And he speaks about Guti. I think also Patrice, Patrice Lumumba, also speaks about this. Guti, guys, we need to, similar to how you mentioned China capitalism, let's have Africa capitalism on African terms, taking into account our cultural context, our cultural history, how we do business, you know what I mean? Because sometimes we say standards, I'm speaking from corporate now, that no, this is not global standards or whatever, but it doesn't mean good if we don't meet those standards, it's wrong.
Yeah.
It's just that it's your standards and how you view things should be done. So I get your answer, even though you never really
I don't even
answered
think
that.
we can have African capitalism. I think we just wouldn't have capitalism, to be honest, because I think by changing the fundamental nature of capitalism, you no longer have capitalism, right?
Sure.
Like, if you say there's no exploitation in our system, that is no longer capitalism. So, in fact, we just need African economic policy that works for Africa.
But okay,
right?
then let's yeah, so it's very hard to actually answer what was for. You never really answered me in terms of if capitalism. You kind of did, but you also didn't. You basically. Let me try to summarize your answer anyway, right?
Yes.
Because economists always say on the one hand, but on the other hand.
Because we can't, I can't run an
I know,
experiment to know if capitalism would work.
No, of course.
I mean, I generally know it doesn't
we basically now can look back and say it was not. Is it fair to say it was not for Africa? We can look back. Yeah. Obviously, we always look back in hindsight. It's easy, but at the time we thought, okay, it's probably the best policy. Capitalism seems to work. There was the IMF dabbling. World
I was
Bank.
going to say, did we think it was this? It was the
Well,
policy, or we were where we
our hands were forced.
Hands were forced.
Yeah, but I mean, we need to obviously also understand the context that the government at the time were facing, etc. Because I do know when I was reading your boy's book, The 23 Things They Don't Tell You About Capitalism, apparently Africa GDP was actually growing.
Yeah, in the 60s.
Yeah, this was before your boys at the IMF.
But it was also before the commodity crisis, the commodity price crisis. That's what forced us into those hands, right? It was because our growth was
But who caused that?
Ish, the global economy, guys.
Okay.
Can't blame fingers there.
Okay, no, look, we can obviously go on and on about this. So I want to explore this further in another podcast episode. Let's briefly speak about the IMF track record in development, right?
Yeah.
I know earlier calling them Umashonisa
or
reformed Mashonisa.
That's what Duma calls them. He wrote it in his Business Day op-ed.
So speak to me about the IMF. Let's understand the history briefly of the IMF and the track record.
Yeah, so IMF, first of all, IMF World Bank both formed in 1944 as international financial institutions, right? But important to note that their mandates are not the same. People like to say IMF and World Bank interchangeably or to critique them together, but that's not the same. They're not the same thing. And the IMF is more interested in short-term stabilization. So
Sure.
all their loans are short-term and are there to basically help with demand
Sure.
shortfall. So that's what when you had a commodity crisis or price drops, right? And it's really to help you bridge the gap between exports and foreign currency. So you would go to the IMF if you feel that because of the crisis you won't be able to afford exports or foreign currency. And so actually this is a very interesting point about South Africa, because arguably South Africa is qualified for the loan, but we don't have a balance of payments crisis or urgent balance of payment needs, which is that foreign currency need. So interesting there, but we won't get into it too much. But to say that the IMF, okay, they happened in 1944. They help basically post-World War, like development, World War II in particular. They help these developed countries now to recover, particularly Europe. And yeah, the 1970s, and now they've got a neoliberal agenda. That's a big thing, you know. So 1970s, they enter into Africa, help a lot of countries through their stabilization policies, which, if I could summarize their policies, they're about a small state, cutting wages, setting the price right. So whether it's like wage prices or what prices, in a way, it's a very interventionist method because it doesn't leave the market to determine the prices, but it's about setting prices right. It's about fiscal discipline, which is what South Africa is doing now, right? So basically, if you look at our supplementary, what we've proposed we're going to do is what an IMF program would look like in the 1970s, right? So they come in and they say, we'll give you money, but you have to follow these conditions. You have to cut, and it's very interesting to see the current moment, because a lot of African countries cut healthcare spend, and so in reflection now, the IMF are like, "Oops, sorry, we shouldn't have made you cut these budgets, because now we're in this health crisis, right? Which affects. It's not just about local; it's a global crisis, and in a way, it affects everyone in a different way. So." That's the IMF. And so what that led to, the IMF and World Bank policies combined actually led to the lost decade of Africa, is what it's called. There's also a lost decade of South America, which is also the same policies.
What is that?
It's basically when the IMF and the World Bank implemented policies that basically destroyed the economies. Not destroyed in that way, but really hurts the economies in ways that increase inequality. And so then the IMF and World Bank went back and said, oh my gosh, this increase in inequality, so now we need reform. This is why you can't reform capitalism, guys. No, so the IMF and the World Bank are like, as in, okay, this does not lead to what we thought it would do. It didn't help these African countries. Some of these countries are now heavily indebted to us. So now they're borrowing to pay us back our loans. It's like going to a mashonisa, borrowing a loan from a mashonisa, and then now you have to pay back the mashonisa, and you don't have money. So now you go to the mashonisa for a new loan to pay the old
back,
loan.
yeah.
Right? So a lot of countries by 2010 were actually in their 2010s were actually into their third decade of IMF loans and World Bank, which goes to show that these programs, which were quote unquote designed to be short term, not too long programs, have structurally hurt these economies and made them dependent in many ways to aid, in many ways to the financing, in many ways to that kind of structure. And so in that regard, the IMF policies and the World Bank really did not lead to the outcomes that they thought they would. The neoliberal agenda did not lead to the great development that they thought would. So that's really it in a nutshell. And I said to someone the other day that I think part of the problem with South Africa and how we are talking about or experiencing the IMF loan is that we don't have a living memory of experiencing the IMF in that way. We've never had an IMF program in South Africa. People in other countries will tell you about IMF programs in their countries. We've never been there. And so because we don't have a living memory of how the IMF and so forth have really restrained governments. In fact, there's great literature around who's the government accountable to. Is it the IMF and the World Bank or to its citizens? and whose ideas are being put forward. Is it the citizens or the IMF and the World Bank?
And so, yeah, which was gonna make.
Are they stressing you? The IMF and the World Bank are stressful, ne?
Yeah, no, I was gonna ask, like, how's the IMF and the World Bank, like, I know we're generalizing at the moment, but destroyed African economies, but I guess it's just the whole debt thing, right?
Yeah,
And
it's the economic policy as well.
you've actually just explained it, but for me, it's like, okay, if you're taking accountability to say your programs that you thought were gonna do well, how do you fix it? As an IMF organization, do you know what I mean? Because
Yeah.
I'm on my third loan
Decade.
bailouts, whatever you want to call it. How about forgiving some of my debts, because you are also partially to blame?
Yeah.
I know it's.
No, but that's been the big discussion. During COVID, the IMF said they would give debt relief to a number of countries, and most of them are considered to be low-income countries, right? So there has been some debt relief being proposed and so forth, but definitely not on the scale. And in fact, there was that program for heavily indebted countries in the past where they forgave debt in general. But the thing is, when you have to forgive debt for a country, it's not like they're starting from a quote unquote clean slate. They still need financing to change trajectory. And so that's where the problem lies, right? It's because you can forgive debt, sure. But then they're probably going to need more debt to now kickstart the economy to begin with. And so in that way, it's been very problematic. And also the other problematic elements of the IMF and so forth are issues such as technical capacity. So for a very long time, the IMF and the World Bank would say, look, we're going to give you money, but out of this money, you must pay for our consultants effectively. So there was this, it's almost like what do you call it? A bucket with a hole. This is one thing that people used to say, that the absorption rate of the aid itself, by the time it gets to the people who need it, it's so small. It's like they're getting the last drops because you have the technical assistance, you've got all these different things. Then the IMF maybe insists that you import certain goods. Now you've already lost so much of that money that by the time it gets to the person that it's supposed to benefit, it's not as much as it should have been. So there's been just generally, and I think the issues are not just about like how the IMF borrows money, but it's actually like what it means to have institutions with such global dominance. And that's why people were excited about the BRICS Bank, because it was an alternative.
Yeah, breaking off from it.
Yeah. But lots of problems around that, about how we think about sovereignty, how we think about the global political sphere, and how the forces of influence.
Cool. So welcome. This is the last part of the show. It's tradition on this podcast. No, excuse me. We'll just look under the hood of Busi to just get to know what really drives you. But this is going to be more around business economics as well, because that is your specialty since you live and breathe it. But also just getting to know you a little bit. So let's begin on that, right? It's not going to be deep questions.
I get it.
Anyways, first, because my voice just goes lower.
I guess
what's your deepest fear in life?
Whoa.
What is your deepest? No, I'm joking. So, do you have an economic view that you have and that you have a strong opinion on that you'd be reluctant to share in front of your colleagues?
Not really. I work in an institute that's very progressive, and therefore, generally you can say your ideas, and people are not afraid to say their ideas. But I also feel like by virtue of us already being on the fringe, it's like you can say whatever you want in a way. And I think we are in a context where people will correct you in a tender way. Like people won't be like, you are a horrible person, cancelled vibes, you know? So, but I don't really think I've got like, things that I'm afraid to say. And I think ultimately then you have to ask yourself, why can't I say those things?
Mm.
What is problematic about them such that I can't say them?
Yeah.
If you can't say it, there's something wrong with it, right? And if you can say it, it means you can back it up.
Mm.
That's
And so, okay, let me rather ask this question in a different way then. What do most economists disagree with you on?
that government should spend more on a fiscal stimulus.
Okay, sure. That's fine. Second question. In the last 10 years, has your view on economics, world economics changed? And if yes, how?
Absolutely. 10 years. Oh, okay.
So what was your view before, and then how has it changed?
Okay, first of all, 10 years ago, I didn't even know what economics
Okay,
was.
okay, but when you first started studying
When I
economics to
started,
now, yeah.
it's changed a lot because I feel that initially my economics education centralized neoliberalism in a way that I thought that was the truth.
Mm.
And as and I didn't think it was the truth. I mean, I still criticize it because it didn't make sense. You know, you also now as a person, you're
Yeah.
like, guys, but there's inequality. People don't make rational decisions.
Yeah,
I mean, really,
yeah.
it doesn't make sense. But I think the political component of it, it really, and particularly in the South African context, has changed a lot since I was a first year student.
Okay. Can you elaborate? Like, what has changed now?
What has changed? Yo, guys, it's like I think I would have never used the word, for instance, structural injustice as a first year. I would have never thought of economics as being violent to people. You know what I mean? Like economics can be very violent to people. And capitalism is very violent to people, and all these different structures, and they perpetuate these same. I mean, obviously I was always considering myself as a feminist, but I couldn't marry like feminism and economics in a real way. But now, I've learned that there's a school of thought called feminist economics, and so there are many things about. I think what I've done better is realigned what I studied with who I am and what I believe at my core. I think that's actually been the most beautiful and rewarding thing, is this idea that you don't have to change who you are to be an economist. Your thoughts about the world and how it should be, right, already exist in economics somewhere. You just have to find them.
Sure.
So yeah.
Okay. Nice. Third question. What do you believe to be absolutely true? Whether it's personally or economically, or just your beliefs actually generally, but you can't prove it,
Yo,
even though you can't prove it.
that's so hard. I don't know. I never thought about that. What do I think is true but can't prove? Sure, that's hard. I don't know if I have an answer.
Answer.
You've got to be a question that I've got answers to everything, but not this question. Of those people,
It
answer
took
every
me
question.
3 hours to get there. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, we'll return to it. Can we come back to this question? It's the hardest question.
Okay. No. Okay, cool. Second to last, or third to last, so we'll come back to that one. If you could ask any person, a single person, and they were forced to answer truthfully, so truth serum or whatever, right? Who would you ask and what would you ask them?
Ooh, this is a good one. I would ask Tito Mboweni if he genuinely believes in his economic policies and that they are the best way forward for South Africa. Like, in his deepest of deep hearts, ne? As a person who was part of the movement, the anti-apartheid movement, as, not from the capitalist he thinks he is, but truthfully, does he genuinely?
Okay.
Yeah, that's what I'd want to know, actually.
Let's come back to, what do you believe to be true? Even though you can't prove it.
The future is female. Yeah, that's it. I can't prove if it will happen or how it will happen, but I know that it has to be.
And my last question. We've spoken obviously a lot about economics. if you made it this far in the podcast, like, well done. I'm very interested in these things.
Wait, but I actually take my quote back.
What?
The future is female. No, that doesn't make sense. Look at me taking back my answer. I'm just like, no, man. What do I believe to be true? I have to think about that again. So let's go to the last question.
Well, this is a closing question, but
Okay, so must I answer the one, what do I know to be true? But can't prove. Aye, man, that's too hard. I think the things I know to be true, I can prove. I'm an economist.
yeah,
Evidence is
that's
everything.
what I'm saying. But that's why I wanted to ask you that question. Okay,
Evidence
it's
is
fine
everything.
if you can't answer it. You don't have an answer to that.
Yeah.
The future is female. That's what you answer. We'll
No,
stick with
because
it.
it's not female. That's so binary. You see, that's why I need to cancel myself. The future is not female because that's a biological, like, a very binary thing.
Okay.
The future is woman with an X.
Okay.
There we go.
So my last question. Look, we've spoken a lot about economics, and critiqued it. Um, I wish we did spend more time on the good as well, which we can do in another episode. Because I do believe, obviously, it hasn't. Look, it's been effed up from SA, IMF. I do believe, though, there is some good that happens, a positive consequence. I do believe that the government, as much as we need to hold them accountable, we've critiqued them. There's some good that has definitely been done from RDP housing. More people have access to housing. More people have access to water. I'm only saying this because it's not. I don't want this just to be a pessimistic, another Me Too vlog podcast that's just always critiquing government, IMF. I do know aid has helped when it was really needed. Obviously we can always do better. So I think I just want to say that as a disclaimer to say there is a positive consequence with all of the things we've been discussing, even with COVID closing down the economy. We can never actually measure the amount of lives we've saved.
Yo, guys,
Recovery
people are going to
rates,
be debating this for the next 10 years.
but I mean recovery rates of 66%. I don't know where the global average is now, but we need to also look at the other side as well, which forms a healthy debate. Anyways, I'm just going on a tangent, but I do believe, no, we do need to also talk about the positives, that they try. I mean, a good book you must probably read called Factfulness by Hans Rosling, where he speaks about globally as an economy, right? We've actually done a lot of good. If you look at Africa, more people, for example, more children live past the age of 5,
like the
etc.
basic
Yes,
indicators.
more countries are not developing, more countries have increased their income, Topic for another day. Anyways.
No, there's been
Disclaimer.
improvements,
Yes.
of course. Economic indicator improvements.
Yeah. So let's also not just shy away from that. My last question, parting notes. What is your dream for Africa and South Africa?
Yo, guys, I've got many dreams, but I think the one that I'm sticking to right now, because I've decided that I am one person. And in terms of, so I'll share the dream that I feel I can contribute to most. Because they're dreams that we just hope someone out there with the expertise can get to. Because we don't have the means to get to it. But I think for me is really doing everything and to ensure that at the very least we implement gender responsive budgets on the African continent. And I feel that that would change, literally change, how men, right, as well. Not so it's not because I think when people hear gender, they hear women and children. No, but I feel like gender responsive budgets, which emerge from the feminist economics tradition, are about how do we transform people's lives with the keen interest on how the budget impacts each and every individual life. It's not just the average. So for me, it would be how do we bring it back? How do we change it? Because guys, gender responsive budgets were things of the 90s there. So in a way, part of us is not just implementing as is. We can't just pick it up where we left off and just say, implement today and we're happy. It's about how do we unlearn, relearn, and redesign for the current moment, taking into account all the lives, and in you know, like in a sense that you know, but like people's lives matter, and how do we make people's experiences of the budget different? How do we improve state legitimacy of budgets? And youth, like, I mean, I did an interview with Youth Capital recently, which is, they work on youth issues around employment and so forth, right? And they were asking me these questions, and I was like, guys, first of all, the government doesn't mention youth in most of these budgets. Like, you wish. Like, we're not even there. Like, they barely mention women in their growth strategy. They barely mention man in the strategy. And you can't make economic policy, because economic policy is about people. You can't make economic policy if you don't see those people. And so for me, I think if we reimagine what fiscal policy in particular, government spend in particular, does on the African continent, everywhere, even if we've got little money, how do we make that money matter for the people that matter? That, I think, that's the one thing that I think I can directly contribute to. The rest, I've got big dreams about many other things, but those require other people's expertise, and you know.
No, thank you for that, Busi. Look, I know it's been a long interview, and you've done many interviews this week, even today. So I want to just take this moment to appreciate your time. Thank you for actually doing this. I've learned so much. I've learned so much about the economy, about Mashonisa of the world. You know, thank you for that. And
Living their
the
best
one thing
lives.
I will take from you is just I appreciate your passion for the subject matter that you speak on, even though a lot of people find it boring, and probably still find it boring. But no, I think the one learning for me is that when you're so passionate about something, I can see how you live and breathe it, and every day you wake up. And we were speaking earlier in terms of how you interchangeably speak about economics, and then you're speaking about your personal life, but it's just part of your life. So I appreciate that, and it inspires me to actually find, it pushes me to also just find the subject matter that, goddamn, I can speak about, like you know, go
but
deeply.
You know, you can't.
And
You know, I just want to add something to that. I think the passion for me is because economics is not just what I do. I live in this economy. Like, I live this experience. I buy a product that pays VAT. Do you know what I mean? And I think when you interlink your study of choice or whatever, and you focus it, like, I always reflect on this, and I think that's the hard thing about my job, is this idea that at the micro level, I have to live these structural injustices. As a Black woman in this economy, I am living those injustices. At the macro level, I am fighting against those injustices, but those injustices are still perpetuating, right? Like, my fighting doesn't mean they stop, in a way. So you're fighting at various levels. And, you know, even in workspaces, right? Like, no workspace is perfect, no sector is perfect. And therefore, you see these structural inequalities reproduce themselves everywhere, right? So it's seamless in that way. And I feel like the more people, not everyone has to be an economist, but I think everyone has to understand that the economy belongs to all of us. And we have to be, there's a great concept of economic citizenry. And I think I consider myself an economic citizen as much as I study economics, but I'm also an economic citizen that operates within this economy.
Lovely. So, thank you. I was basically getting to that point.
Pleasure.
Thank
It's
you.
a pleasure. It took a long time to get here, but here we are.